The Silent Filters, 10 Daily Habits Destroying Your Kidneys. Deep within the human anatomy lies a pair of biological marvels, tirelessly scrubbing toxins from your blood every second of existence. Yet millions are unknowingly waging a slow, silent war against this critical infrastructure. We indulge in daily routines that appear harmless on the surface, but chemically, they are catastrophic. The damage accumulates microscopically, often remaining invisible until the machinery fails completely and irreversible pathology sets in. We are about to expose the 10 most dangerous behaviors sabotaging your internal ecosystem, beginning with the neglect of the most fundamental element of life itself.
Not drinking enough water, the chronic desiccation of the biological engine. To understand the catastrophic impact of chronic dehydration on the renal system, one must first appreciate the architectural marvel that is the human kidney. These are not merely passive strainers, they are sophisticated, high-pressure chemical engineering plants. Every day, the kidneys process approximately 180 liters of blood, sifting through the body's entire volume dozens of times to extract a mere 1 to 2 liters of waste products. This process, known as glomerular filtration, relies entirely on the principle of hemodynamics and fluid pressure. Water is the medium, the solvent, and the transportation system for this entire operation. When an individual fails to consume adequate water, they are not simply thirsty, they are fundamentally altering the physics of their internal environment, forcing the kidneys to operate under conditions of extreme physiological distress that over time lead to mechanical failure. The primary function of the kidney is to filter out toxins, urea, creatinine, and various metabolic byproducts while retaining essential proteins in cells. This filtration occurs in the nephrons, microscopic structural units that act as the body's sanitation workers. There are roughly 1 million nephrons in each kidney, and they function optimally only when there is sufficient hydrostatic pressure and fluid volume. When a person is chronically dehydrated, the volume of blood decreases, and the blood itself becomes more viscous. This thickening of the vital fluid forces the heart to pump harder and reduces the efficiency of the delivery of blood to the renal arteries. The kidneys, sensing this drop in fluid availability, switch into a desperate conservation mode. The pituitary gland releases vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormone, screaming at the kidneys to hoard every drop of water available. The urine becomes concentrated, dark, and chemically aggressive. Instead of a gentle, flowing river flushing out toxins, the renal tubules are bathed in a sludge of concentrated waste. This is the physiological equivalent of running a car engine without oil. The friction and heat of the chemical reactions begin to degrade the delicate tissue of the kidney itself. The most immediate and agonizing consequence of this low fluid state is the genesis of nephrolithiasis, kidney stones.
To describe a kidney stone simply as a rock is to undermine the geological complexity of the pathology. These are crystalline structures formed when the concentration of minerals in the urine reaches a supersaturation point, a state where the fluid can no longer hold the solute in suspension. In a well-hydrated body, minerals like calcium, oxalate, and uric acid remain dissolved and are expelled seamlessly. In a dehydrated body, the urine volume is too low to keep these minerals apart. They begin to nucleate, binding together in a lattice structure that grows, layer by microscopic layer, much like a stalactite in a cave, but at a vastly accelerated rate. Calcium oxalate stones are the most common, jagged, crystalline shards that form in the renal pelvis. When these stones eventually move, trying to pass through the ureter, a tube only a few millimeters wide, they cause renal colic, a pain often described by medical professionals and patients alike as worse than childbirth, gunshot wounds, or bone fractures. This is not merely bad luck, it is a direct mathematical consequence of insufficient solvent volume. Beyond the acute agony of stones, there is the insidious, silent progression of chronic kidney disease, CKD, linked to low water intake. Recent investigative research into Mesoamerican nephropathy, a mysterious epidemic of kidney failure among sugarcane workers in Central America, has illuminated the devastating power of dehydration. These workers, laboring in extreme heat with insufficient rehydration, were suffering from repeated acute kidney injuries day after day. The mechanism is believed to be a combination of ischemia, lack of blood flow, and the toxicity of concentrated uric acid crystallizing within the tubules. While the average office worker is not sweating in a sugarcane field, the principle of chronic low-grade dehydration applies. Millions of people exist in a state of perpetual semi-dehydration, drinking coffee, soda, or alcohol, diuretics that strip water from the body, rather than pure water. Over decades, this forces the kidneys to hyperfilter, working overtime to maintain homeostasis in a fluid-deprived environment. This hyperfiltration causes glomerular sclerosis, a scarring of the filtering units. Once a nephron is scarred, it dies. It does not regenerate. The kidney has a high redundancy, meaning you can lose significant function before you feel sick, but by the time symptoms appear, the damage is often irreversible. Furthermore,
The impact of dehydration extends into the complex hormonal regulation of blood pressure, which creates a vicious feedback loop damaging the kidneys further. The kidneys are the master regulators of blood pressure via the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When water intake is low, the kidneys secrete renin, triggering a cascade that constricts blood vessels to maintain pressure in a low-volume system. This systemic vasoconstriction causes hypertension, which is the second leading cause of kidney failure. By failing to drink water, one is essentially forcing their body to artificially inflate its own blood pressure to survive. This heightened pressure slams into the delicate capillaries of the glomeruli, damaging them over time. It is a slow-motion demolition of the body's filtration infrastructure. The tragedy is that this is entirely preventable. The evolutionary design of the human thirst mechanism is brilliant, but modern life has conditioned us to ignore it or suppress it with food. We have unlearned the most basic survival instinct, leading to a modern plague of renal stress that is entirely self-inflicted. We must also consider the role of the urinary tract environment. Water is the primary defense mechanism against infection. A robust flow of urine acts as a mechanical flush, preventing bacteria like E. coli from adhering to the walls of the bladder and climbing the ureters to the kidneys. In a dehydrated state, urine sits stagnant in the bladder for longer periods, and the lack of volume means the flushing mechanism is weak. This stagnation creates a perfect incubator for bacterial growth. If these bacteria ascend to the kidneys, they cause pyelonephritis, a severe kidney infection that can lead to scarring and permanent tissue loss. The simple act of drinking water is effectively a continuous sterilization process for the urinary tract. By neglecting this, we invite invasion. The color of one's urine serves as a direct diagnostic readout of this risk profile. Pale straw indicates a safe high-flow system, while deep amber signals a system under toxic stress. The cultural aspect of this issue cannot be ignored. In the 21st century, we are surrounded by beverages that are chemically engineered to be hyperpalatable, but hydrologically counterproductive. The hydration industry sells vitamin waters, sports drinks, and energy elixirs, yet pure, clean water is often viewed as boring or a secondary option.
This shift in consumption habits has coincided with rising rates of kidney stones in children and adolescents, a demographic previously thought immune to such ailments. The normalization of chronic dehydration is a public health crisis masquerading as a lifestyle choice. We treat water as an optional beverage rather than the fundamental biological requirement for the solubility of life. The kidney is an organ of balance, constantly adjusting electrolytes and pH. Without water, it cannot perform this balancing act, leading to systemic acidosis and electrolyte derangement that affects muscle function, cardiac rhythm, and cognitive clarity. The brain, which is 75% water, suffers alongside the kidneys, with dehydration linked to cognitive decline, mood instability, and headaches, often the first sign that the renal system is struggling to conserve fluid. Ultimately, the habit of not drinking enough water is a form of biological negligence. It is a refusal to provide the body with the basic tools it needs to clean itself. The kidneys are resilient, often functioning at a fraction of their capacity without complaint, but they are not invincible. The damage incurred by years of dehydration is cumulative. Every crystal formed, every nephron scarred by ischemia, and every spike in blood pressure contributes to a slow erosion of renal reserve. By the time the creatinine levels rise in a blood test, significant function has already been lost. The glass of water on the desk is not just a drink, it is a medical intervention, a shield against stone formation, and the fuel for the most sophisticated filtration machinery known to nature. Ignoring this simple need is a gamble with the body's waste management system, a gamble where the house, in this case pathology, eventually wins.
2. Excessive salt intake, the silent corrosion of the vascular architecture. Salt, sodium chloride, it is a mineral so vital to human existence that wars have been fought over it, trade routes established for it, and salaries, from the Latin salarium, paid in it. It is the electrolyte that allows our nerves to fire and our muscles to contract. Without sodium, the human heart would cease to beat and the brain would cease to compute. However, in the context of the modern industrial diet, this essential element has been transformed from a rare and precious nutrient into a pervasive toxin that is slowly dismantling the renal health of billions. The habit of excessive salt intake is perhaps the most insidious of all kidney-damaging behaviors because it is inextricably linked to the mechanics of blood pressure and the delicate microvasculature of the kidney's filtration system. We are drowning our organs in a saline solution that they were never evolutionarily designed to handle. To comprehend the damage caused by excess salt, one must look at the phenomenon of osmosis and the concept of sodium sensitivity. The kidneys are responsible for maintaining the precise concentration of sodium in the bloodstream, usually around 135 to 145 milliequivalents per liter. When we consume a high-salt meal, a processed burger, a bag of chips, or a canned soup, we flood the bloodstream with sodium. The body, prioritizing homeostasis, must dilute this excess sodium to prevent toxicity. It does this by pulling water from the cells and retaining fluid that should have been excreted. This fluid retention dramatically increases the volume of blood coursing through the circulatory system. Imagine a pardon hose designed for a specific water pressure. Now imagine turning the spigot on whole blast while narrowing the nozzle. The pressure skyrockets. This is systemic hypertension, and the kidneys are at the epicenter of the damage. The kidneys are vascular organs. They are essentially giant balls of blood vessels. The glomeruli, the tiny filtering units, are composed of tufts of capillaries with walls so thin they allow for the passage of microscopic molecules. When systemic blood pressure rises due to salt-induced fluid retention, this high pressure is transmitted directly into these delicate capillaries. This condition, known as glomerular hypertension, acts like a sandblaster on the interior walls of the kidney's vessels. Over time,
The physical force of the blood shears the endothelial lining, causing inflammation and scarring. This scarring process is called nephrosclerosis. As the vessel walls thicken and harden to protect themselves from the pressure, the lumen, the opening, narrows, reducing blood flow to the nephrons. Starved of oxygen and nutrients, the nephrons die. This creates a feedback loop. Fewer functioning nephrons mean the remaining ones must work harder to filter the blood, raising the pressure further, causing more scarring and leading to end-stage renal disease, ESRD. But the devastation of salt is not limited to hemodynamics. Emerging research suggests that excess sodium has direct toxic effects on the kidney tissue independent of blood pressure. High sodium intake has been shown to induce oxidative stress, a chemical imbalance where free radicals damage the cellular machinery. It also triggers the production of inflammatory cytokines, causing a low-grade chronic inflammation within the renal parenchyma. Furthermore, excessive salt intake disrupts the delicate balance of the renin-angiotensin system. Paradoxically, while high salt usually suppresses renin, the local tissue systems within the kidney may remain activated, promoting fibrosis, the formation of excess fibrous connective tissue. This turns the soft, permeable, functioning tissue of the kidney into hard, non-functional scar tissue. It is a slow petrification of the organ. The cultural and historical context of this habit is profound. For 99% of human history, sodium was scarce. Our ancestors consumed less than 0.5 grams per day. Consequently, the human kidney evolved to be incredibly efficient at retaining salt. We are biological salt hoarders. Today, however, the average American consumes over 3.4 grams, 3,400 milligrams of sodium daily, vastly exceeding the recommended limit of 2,300 milligrams and the ideal limit of 1,500 milligrams. This mismatch between our Stone Age biology and our Space Age food supply is the root of the crisis. The industrial food complex has weaponized salt. It is cheap, it acts as a preservative, extending shelf life indefinitely, and it masks the bland taste of processed ingredients. More importantly, it triggers the bliss point in the brain, lighting up dopamine receptors and overriding satiety signals. We are not just eating salt, we are addicted to it. A critical, often overlooked aspect of salt damage is its relationship with proteinuria, the leakage of protein into the urine.
In a healthy kidney, the filtration barrier is negatively charged and tight enough to repel albumin, a vital blood protein. High salt intake alters the hemodynamics and the permeability of this barrier. When the barrier is breached, protein leaks into the urine. This protein is not just a marker of damage, it is a toxic agent itself. As albumin passes through the renal tubules where it doesn't belong, it causes inflammation and further scarring of the tubular cells. Thus, salt initiates a cascade where the kidney's own filtration failure accelerates its demise. This is particularly dangerous for individuals with diabetes or pre-existing hypertension, acting as a force multiplier for kidney destruction. We must also scrutinize the source of this sodium. The salt shaker on the dinner table accounts for only a fraction of intake. The real enemy is hidden salt in bread, cheese, sauces, deli meats, and restaurant meals. A single restaurant entree can contain 2 days' worth of sodium. This ubiquity makes the habit incredibly difficult to break. The consumer is often fighting a losing battle against food scientists who have engineered products to be hypersaline. Furthermore, the labeling laws often obfuscate the true sodium content through manipulative serving sizes. The systemic poisoning of the food supply means that even health-conscious individuals can unknowingly damage their kidneys simply by eating normal food that hasn't been prepared from scratch. The interaction between sodium and potassium is another casualty of the modern diet. The kidneys use a sodium-potassium pump to regulate cellular function. A diet high in salt is almost invariably low in potassium found in fresh fruits and vegetables. This imbalance paralyzes the kidney's ability to regulate blood pressure. Potassium acts as a vasodilator, relaxing blood vessels and helping the kidneys excrete sodium. Without enough potassium to counteract the deluge of sodium, the arteries remain stiff and constricted. This dietary inversion, high sodium, low potassium, is the hallmark of the Western diet and the primary driver of the global hypertension epidemic. Finally, the long-term prognosis for a high-salt life is grim. The damage is cumulative and often asymptomatic for decades. This is the silent killer aspect of kidney disease. You do not feel your glomeruli hardening. You do not feel the protein leaking.
You only realize the damage when the doctor tells you your GFR, glomerular filtration rate, has plummeted and you are facing dialysis. Dialysis is a poor substitute for a living kidney. It is a grueling, life-altering treatment that replaces the constant, elegant filtration of the organ with a mechanical process that can only achieve a fraction of the efficiency. The tragedy of salt-induced kidney failure is that it is a disease of excess. We are literally eating our kidneys to death. In conclusion, excessive salt intake is not merely a dietary indiscretion, it is a relentless assault on the vascular integrity of the renal system. It exploits the body's evolutionary mechanisms for salt retention, turning a survival trait into a liability. It creates a high-pressure environment that shreds the microscopic filters essential for life, induces oxidative stress, and promotes fibrosis. The transition from a low-sodium ancestral diet to a high-sodium industrial diet represents one of the most significant shifts in human physiology, one that our kidneys are struggling to survive. To protect these organs, we must recognize salt for what it has become in the modern context, a pervasive, addictive, and destructive agent that requires vigilant monitoring and a radical rethinking of how we approach nutrition.
3. Overusing painkillers, NSAIDs, the chemical strangulation of renal blood flow. In the modern pharmacological landscape, few substances are as ubiquitous, as trusted, and as fundamentally misunderstood as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs. Ibuprofen, naproxen, high-dose aspirin, and diclofenac, these are the household names found in medicine cabinets, glove compartments, and desk drawers across the globe. We view them as benign magic bullets, capable of erasing headaches, soothing arthritic joints, and silencing the aches of daily life with a single swallow. However, beneath this veil of over-the-counter safety lies a potent physiological mechanism that, when abused, acts as a chemical tourniquet on the kidneys. The habit of popping painkillers for every minor discomfort is not merely a symptom of our low tolerance for pain, it is a direct assault on the hemodynamic stability of the renal system, leading to a condition grimly known as analgesic nephropathy. To understand the gravity of this mistake, we must descend into the microscopic vascular architecture of the kidney and witness the war between pain relief and organ survival. The kidney is an organ defined by blood flow. It receives roughly 20 to 25% of the cardiac output, a staggering volume for an organ comprising less than 1% of total body weight. This immense perfusion is necessary for filtration. The blood enters the glomerulus, the filter, through a tiny vessel called the afferent arteriole and exits through the efferent arteriole. The pressure within the glomerulus must be maintained at a precise level to ensure waste is pushed out of the blood. The body regulates this pressure using a class of lipid compounds called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are vasodilators. Their job, in the context of the kidney, is to keep the afferent arteriole wide open, ensuring a steady, robust river of blood flows into the filter, even when the rest of the body might be under stress. They are the guardians of renal perfusion. Here lies the mechanism of destruction. NSAIDs work by inhibiting the cyclooxygenase COX enzymes. These enzymes are responsible for producing prostaglandins, which cause pain and inflammation at the site of an injury. By blocking COX enzymes, NSAIDs successfully stop the production of pain-causing prostaglandins, providing relief. However, the drugs are systemic. They do not know to target only your sprained ankle or throbbing head. They travel everywhere,
Including the kidneys. When they reach the renal tissue, they indiscriminately shut down the production of the prostaglandins that keep the afferent arterioles open. Without this vasodilator support, the arterioles constrict. The floodgates to the kidney are squeezed shut. The result is an immediate, sharp drop in blood flow to the glomeruli. This is renal ischemia, a starvation of blood supply. Every time you take a high dose of ibuprofen, you are essentially choking your kidneys, reducing their oxygen and nutrient supply for the duration of the drug's effect. For a healthy young individual with perfect hydration, the kidneys can usually tolerate this temporary constriction. They are resilient enough to bounce back once the drug clears the system. However, the danger arises in the context of habitual use or chronic use. Millions of people take these drugs daily for chronic back pain, arthritis, or recurring headaches. They are living in a state of perpetual renal vasoconstriction. Over months and years, this chronic ischemia leads to the death of kidney tissue. The specific pathology is often renal papillary necrosis. The renal papillae are the tips of the pyramids within the kidney where the urine drains into the calyces. These areas have the poorest blood supply even in a healthy kidney. When NSAIDs reduce blood flow further, these tips are the first to die. The tissue becomes necrotic, literally rotting away and sloughing up into the urinary tract, causing obstructions, infections, and permanent loss of function. The cultural narrative surrounding these drugs exacerbates the risk. We live in a society that valorizes pushing through the pain. Athletes are particularly susceptible to this habit. In the world of endurance sports, ibuprofen is jokingly referred to as vitamin I. Runners, cyclists, and football players often take prophylactic doses before events to preempt slowness. This is a recipe for disaster. During intense exercise, the body naturally shunts blood away from the kidneys to fuel the muscles. The kidneys are already operating on a shoestring budget of blood flow. Adding an NSAID to this mix, which chemically clamps the vessels shut, creates a perfect storm for acute kidney injury, AKI. There have been numerous documented cases of marathon runners entering acute renal failure at the finish line, not solely from dehydration, but from the combination of dehydration and NSAID use.
The drug removed the kidney's only safety mechanism, prostaglandin dilation, during a moment of extreme physiological stress. Furthermore, the risk is compounded exponentially when NSAIDs are combined with other common medications. Medical professionals warn of the triple whammy, the combination of an NSAID, which constricts blood inflow, a diuretic, which reduces fluid volume, and an ACE inhibitor or ARB, blood pressure medications that dilate the blood outflow. When taken together, these three drugs destroy the pressure gradient necessary for filtration from all sides. The kidney simply shuts down. It is a mechanical failure induced by chemical interference.
Yet many elderly patients with hypertension and arthritis are prescribed exactly this cocktail, or inadvertently create it by buying over-the-counter painkillers while on prescription heart medication. The lack of public awareness regarding this interaction is a silent public health crisis. We must also consider the phenomenon of chronic interstitial nephritis. Beyond the blood flow issues, NSAIDs can trigger an allergic-like inflammatory reaction within the kidney tissue itself. The interstitium, the space between the tubules, becomes infiltrated with immune cells, causing swelling and dysfunction. This can happen after prolonged use or, in some idiosyncratic cases, after a short course. It is a reminder that these drugs are foreign chemical agents. The body's attempt to process them can sometimes result in friendly fire, where the immune system attacks the organ it is trying to protect. The history of analgesic nephritis is dark and telling. In the mid-20th century, a drug called phenacetin was a popular painkiller. It was eventually banned in many countries after it was discovered to cause massive rates of kidney failure and even urothelial cancer. While modern NSAIDs are safer than phenacetin, the principle remains. Chemically altering the body's pain pathways has a biological cost. The transition from phenacetin to aspirin to modern NSAIDs has reduced the toxicity, but the fundamental mechanism, the interference with renal hemodynamics, remains a potent threat. The insidious nature of this habit lies in the lack of immediate feedback. A person does not feel their afferent arterioles constricting. They do not feel the papillae dying until the damage is advanced. The creatinine levels in the blood rise slowly, often undetected until significant function is lost.
By the time a patient presents with swelling legs, fatigue, and frothy urine, the diagnosis of CKD is often irreversible. The patient is left with the bitter irony that the medicine they took to maintain their quality of life, to keep walking, working, and moving without pain, has ultimately shortened their life by destroying their filtration system. In conclusion, the overuse of painkillers is a habit that prioritizes short-term comfort over long-term survival. It treats the kidney as an indestructible bystander rather than a delicate blood-dependent organ. While NSAIDs are valuable tools when used sparingly and correctly, their integration into the daily routine of millions represents a massive chemical burden on the population's renal health. We must rewrite the cultural script that views pain as an enemy to be annihilated instantly with a pill. Sometimes pain is a signal to rest, to recover, and to allow the body to heal without chemical intervention. To ignore this is to risk the slow, silent strangulation of the very organs that keep our blood clean.
4. Holding urine too long, the hydraulic back pressure catastrophe. In the frantic pace of the 21st century, the biological imperative to urinate is often treated as an inconvenience, a distraction to be delayed, suppressed, and managed. We live in a world of back-to-back meetings, long-haul trucking, immersive gaming sessions, and high-stakes professions where leaving one's post is frowned upon. Consequently, millions of people have developed the habit of holding it, voluntarily suppressing the urge to void for hours past the physiological signaling point. While this might seem like a trivial act of willpower, scientifically it is a dangerous game of hydraulic roulette. The bladder is not merely a passive storage bag, it is a dynamic, muscular organ integrated into a high-pressure system. When we overextend its capacity, we disrupt the delicate physics of the urinary tract, creating a back pressure that can devastate the kidneys and turn the body's waste management system into a toxic incubator. To understand the danger, we must examine the mechanics of micturition, urination, and the anatomy of the urinary tree. Urine is produced constantly by the kidneys and flows down 2 ureters into the bladder. The bladder is a hollow organ lined with a complex mesh of smooth muscle fibers known as the detrusor muscle. As urine accumulates, the bladder walls stretch. Specialized mechanoreceptors in the wall detect this stretch and send signals to the sacral spinal cord and the brainstem. It is time to empty. Typically, this signal begins when the bladder holds about 200 to 300 milliliters of fluid. We have the conscious ability to inhibit this reflex, tightening the external sphincter to delay voiding. However, when we habitually ignore this signal and force the bladder to hold 500, 600, or even 800 milliliters, we are subjecting the system to immense intradesical pressure. The most direct threat to the kidneys from this behavior is a phenomenon known as vesicoureteral reflux, VUR. The ureters enter the bladder at an angle, creating a natural one-way valve mechanism that prevents urine from flowing backward. When the bladder is overfilled and stretched to its limit, the geometry of these entrances is distorted. The valve mechanism fails. The high pressure in the bladder forces urine, which is waste fluid laden with toxins and potential bacteria, backward up the ureters and into the renal pelvis. This is hydraulic back pressure.
The kidneys are filtration units designed to operate with a free-flowing output. When the output is blocked or reversed by pressure, the internal pressure within the kidney rises. This condition, known as hydronephrosis, causes the kidney to swell. The delicate tubules and nephrons are compressed against the rigid capsule of the kidney. This compression causes ischemia, lack of blood flow, and direct mechanical damage to the tissue. Over time, chronic reflux leads to reflux nephropathy, a scarring of the kidney tissue that results in permanent loss of function and is a leading cause of hypertension and chronic kidney disease. Beyond the physics of pressure, there is the biological warfare of infection. Urine acts as a medium for bacterial growth. In a healthy system, the regular, complete voiding of urine flushes out bacteria, typically E. coli from the digestive tract, before they can establish a colony. When urine is held for prolonged periods, it becomes a stagnant pool, a warm, nutrient-rich swamp perfect for bacterial multiplication. This stagnation allows bacteria to adhere to the bladder walls and multiply exponentially. Once a colony is established, cystitis, the real danger begins. If the individual continues to hold urine or if reflux occurs, these bacteria are propelled upstream to the kidneys. This results in pyelonephritis, a severe, life-threatening kidney infection. Pyelonephritis is not just a bad UTI, it is a destructive event where bacteria invade the renal parenchyma, causing abscesses and destroying nephrons. Repeated episodes of pyelonephritis caused by habitual retention result in significant renal scarring. The habit of holding urine effectively disables the body's primary defense mechanism against infection, the flush. We must also consider the long-term degradation of the bladder muscle itself, which has secondary effects on the kidneys. The detrusor muscle is like any other muscle. If it is chronically overstretched, it loses its tone and elasticity. Initially, the muscle may hypertrophy, thicken to fight against the retention, but eventually it becomes atonic, flocky, and weak. A lazy bladder can't empty itself completely. This leads to chronic urinary retention, where a significant volume of urine remains in the bladder even after voiding. This residual urine is a permanent reservoir for infection and maintains a constant low-level back pressure on the kidneys. In severe cases,
This requires the lifelong use of catheters, introducing further risks of infection and trauma. The neurological connection can also be severed, the stretch receptors become desensitized, and the brain loses the ability to accurately gauge bladder fullness, leading to overflow incontinence and silent kidney damage. The sociological and occupational aspects of this habit are profound. Teachers often report high rates of urinary tract issues because they cannot leave the classroom. Nurses and surgeons endure marathon procedures without breaks. Truck drivers and pilots face logistical barriers to restrooms. In the digital age, the gamer demographic has emerged as a high-risk group, with individuals ignoring biological urges for hours to avoid interrupting gameplay. There is also a psychological element known as paresis or shy bladder syndrome, where individuals are physically unable to void in public restrooms, forcing them to hold urine for entire workdays. This social conditioning clashes violently with biological necessity. We have built a world that does not prioritize the renal schedule, and our organs are paying the price. There are also rare catastrophic consequences. While uncommon, bladder rupture is a medical emergency that can occur in individuals who hold urine to extreme capacities, particularly if combined with minor abdominal trauma, like a seatbelt injury or a fall. If the bladder bursts, urine floods the abdominal cavity, requiring emergency surgery and posing a massive risk of sepsis and acute renal failure. More commonly, the formation of bladder stones is a risk. Just like kidney stones, minerals in stagnant urine can precipitate out and form stones in the bladder. These stones can block the urethra entirely, causing acute urinary retention, a painful emergency where the bladder cannot empty at all, causing urine to back up instantly to the kidneys, leading to acute kidney injury. The philosophical implication of this habit is one of disconnection. We are organisms designed to respond to internal stimuli. The urge to void is a survival signal. By suppressing it, we are engaging in a form of self-denial that prioritizes external demands, work, entertainment, social norms, over internal physiological integrity. It is a microcosm of modern health neglect, the suppression of the body's voice until it screams in the form of disease. From a preventative standpoint, the solution is deceptively simple: timed voiding.
Rather than waiting for the emergency signal, one should urinate at regular intervals, keeping the system flowing and the pressure low. The teacher's bladder or nurse's bladder should not be badges of honor. They should be recognized as occupational hazards requiring systemic change. Employers and school systems must recognize that access to restrooms is not a luxury, but a biological requirement for renal preservation. In summary, holding urine too long is a mechanical error with chemical consequences. It turns the urinary tract from a one-way river into a stagnant, pressurized reservoir. It invites bacteria to colonize the sterile sanctuary of the kidneys and physically crushes the filtration units through hydraulic back pressure. It creates a vicious cycle of muscle damage, nerve desensitization, and infection that slowly erodes kidney function. The kidneys rely on a free and open exit strategy. Blocking that exit is akin to plugging the exhaust pipe of a running engine. The damage is inevitable, cumulative, and tragically often self-inflicted in the name of convenience.
5. High sugar consumption, the glycotoxic avalanche, and the crystallization of the vascular system. In the annals of nutritional epidemiology, few substances have undergone such a radical transformation in public perception as sugar. Once a luxury spice reserved for nobility, it has become the ubiquitous fuel of the modern industrial machine, saturating the global food supply and acting as the primary driver of the 21st century's most devastating chronic diseases.
While the public consciousness readily associates excess sugar with obesity and type 2 diabetes, the direct and catastrophic impact of high sugar consumption on the renal system remains a dangerously underdiscussed medical reality. The kidney is not merely a bystander in the body's processing of glucose, it is a frontline casualty. When we consume high levels of sugar, whether through sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, or refined carbohydrates, we are essentially turning our bloodstream into a corrosive, sticky syrup that slowly shreds the delicate filtration architecture of the kidneys from the inside out. This process, known as diabetic nephropathy, or increasingly metabolic nephropathy in non-diabetics, is the leading cause of kidney failure worldwide, responsible for filling dialysis centers more than any other single factor. To understand the mechanics of this destruction, we must zoom in on the glomerulus, the microscopic tuft of capillaries where blood filtration occurs. In a healthy state, the blood flows through these vessels smoothly, and insulin regulates the amount of glucose circulating to ensure cells are fed without overwhelming the system. However, in a state of chronic high sugar intake, the body enters a phase of hyperglycemia. The blood becomes saturated with glucose. This excess sugar initiates a process called non-enzymatic glycation. In this chemical reaction, glucose molecules permanently bond to proteins and lipids without the guidance of an enzyme. They essentially caramelize the proteins in the blood vessel walls. These new mutated structures are called advanced glycation end products, or appropriately, AGEs. AGEs are molecular shrapnel. They are rigid, sticky, and inflammatory. When they circulate through the kidney, they bind to the receptors on the endothelial cells lining the glomerular capillaries. This binding triggers a massive inflammatory response, causing the release of cytokines and growth factors that lead to fibrosis, the formation of scar tissue.
The basement membrane of the glomerulus, which acts as the primary filter, begins to thicken and stiffen. It loses its selective permeability. This is the beginning of the end for the nephron. The filter becomes leaky, allowing albumin, protein, to spill into the urine, the hallmark sign of kidney damage known as proteinuria. Simultaneously, the mesangium, the central structural support of the glomerulus, expands due to the accumulation of these AGEs, eventually crushing the capillaries and obliterating the filtration surface area. This specific pathology, known as Kimmel-Stale-Wilson nodules, is the tombstone of a kidney destroyed by sugar. But the damage is not limited to structural scarring. High sugar intake forces the kidneys into a state of hyperfiltration. When blood glucose is high, the kidneys attempt to reabsorb this valuable energy source through the SGLT2 transporters in the proximal tubules. This reabsorption process is energy-intensive and alters the sodium balance within the kidney. To compensate, the kidney dilates the afferent arteriole, the inlet, to increase blood flow and filtration pressure. Essentially, the kidney revs its engine into the red zone, filtering blood at a frantic, unsustainable pace to clear the metabolic load. This state of hyperfiltration creates immense mechanical shear stress on the glomerular walls. For years, a person with a high sugar diet may actually have supernormal kidney function numbers, masking the reality that their organs are burning out. Eventually, this mechanical overuse leads to glomerular burnout, a rapid decline of function, and the onset of end-stage renal disease, ESRD. We must also distinguish the unique and insidious role of fructose, particularly in the form of high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, which permeates the American diet. Unlike glucose, which is metabolized by every cell in the body, fructose is metabolized almost exclusively by the liver. However, recent research indicates that the kidney also attempts to metabolize fructose asterisk results. The breakdown of fructose in the kidney cells depletes ATP, cellular energy, and generates uric acid as a byproduct. High intracellular uric acid is a potent oxidant that induces oxidative stress specifically in the proximal tubules. It causes the cells to become inflamed and fibrotic. Furthermore,
High uric acid levels in the blood, hyperuricemia, are a direct precursor to kidney stones and have been linked to the development of hypertension. Thus, the soda or sweetened tea is not just spiking insulin, it is launching a chemical attack that depletes renal energy reserves and promotes the formation of crystalline stones. The historical trajectory of this crisis is deeply intertwined with the industrialization of food. In the 1970s and 80s, the low-fat dogma took hold of dietary guidelines. To make low-fat food palatable, manufacturers replaced fats with refined sugars and starches. The result was a caloric explosion and the normalization of hyperpalatable, sugar-laden processed foods. We moved from a society that viewed dessert as a treat to one that consumes dessert for breakfast in the form of cereals, yogurts, and pastries. This shift coincided perfectly with the skyrocketing rates of kidney disease. We are now seeing adult-onset pathologies in children, with teenagers displaying the early signs of renal stress previously seen only in middle-aged alcoholics or smokers. The kidney, evolutionarily designed to handle the occasional seasonal fruit, is now bombarded with hundreds of grams of refined sugar daily. It is a biological mismatch of epic proportions. The silent nature of sugar damage is perhaps its most dangerous attribute. The condition known as prediabetes affects nearly 100 million Americans, many of whom are unaware they have it. During this prediabetic phase, blood sugar spikes after meals are high enough to cause the glycation and hyperfiltration damage described above, even if fasting blood sugar remains normal.
The kidneys are suffering micro-injuries with every soda, every candy bar, and every precipitous glucose spike. By the time a patient is formally diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the kidneys may have already endured a decade of abuse. This lag time between behavior and diagnosis is the window where prevention is possible, yet it is the window most often missed by a medical system focused on reactive rather than preventative care. Furthermore, the relationship between sugar and the autonomic nervous system exacerbates renal decline. High insulin levels driven by sugar consumption stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response. This chronic sympathetic activation causes systemic vasoconstriction and sodium retention. The kidneys are told to hold on to salt and water,
raising blood pressure to dangerous levels. Thus, sugar is a double agent. It directly damages the kidney tissue through glycation and oxidative stress, and it indirectly hammers the kidney by inducing hypertension. It creates a closed loop of metabolic dysfunction where the liver, pancreas, and kidneys all begin to fail in unison. This is the essence of metabolic syndrome, a hydra-headed beast that eventually claims the renal system as its prize. The cultural addiction to sugar is difficult to break because it is physiological. Sugar activates the same dopamine pathways in the brain as cocaine and heroin. The sugar crash drives the desire for the next hit, creating a cycle of consumption that is self-perpetuating. Breaking this cycle requires a radical restructuring of one's environment and a painful withdrawal period. However, the alternative is a future tethered to a dialysis machine. Dialysis is a technological miracle, but it is a crude approximation of a kidney. It cannot replicate the hormonal regulation, the precise electrolyte balancing, or the continuous filtration of a healthy organ. It is life support, not a cure. The vast majority of dialysis patients are there because of diabetic nephropathy, a condition driven almost entirely by the consumption of sugar and refined carbohydrates. In the future, we may look back on the ubiquity of sugar in our food supply with the same horror we now view the ubiquity of cigarettes in the mid-20th century. The science is becoming irrefutable. Sugar is a toxin to the vascular system. The kidneys, being the most vascular of organs, are the canary in the coal mine. They are the first to suffer the consequences of our sweet tooth. The crystallization of the biological machinery, the stiffening of the filters, the scarring of the tubules, and the inflammation of the endothelium is a high price to pay for the fleeting pleasure of sweetness. To protect the kidneys, one must declare war on sugar, reading labels with the scrutiny of a forensic accountant, and returning to a diet of whole, unprocessed foods that the body was designed to metabolize.
6. Heavy alcohol drinking, the toxic diuretic and the hepatorenal collapse. Alcohol, chemically known as ethanol, is a unique substance in the human experience. It is a macronutrient, a psychoactive drug, a solvent, and a toxin all wrapped into one socially celebrated package. While moderate consumption has been debated for its potential cardiovascular benefits, heavy alcohol drinking is unequivocally a scorched earth campaign against the body's filtration systems. The kidneys, tasked with maintaining fluid balance and excreting toxins, are hit by a multi-front assault when alcohol is introduced in large quantities. The damage is not merely a result of the alcohol molecule itself, but of the chaotic physiological cascade it triggers, ranging from severe dehydration and electrolyte derangement to extreme hypertension and the catastrophic failure of the liver-kidney axis. To drink heavily is to invite a systemic breakdown, where the kidneys are often the final fatal casualty. The most immediate and mechanically obvious impact of alcohol on the kidneys is its potent diuretic effect. Alcohol inhibits the pituitary gland's secretion of vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone, ADH. ADH is the chemical messenger that tells the kidneys to reabsorb water and keep the body hydrated. When alcohol blocks the signal, the kidneys open the floodgates. They lose the ability to concentrate urine, dumping vast quantities of water, far more than the volume of the beverage consumed. This leads to profound rapid dehydration. As discussed in entry number 1, dehydration forces the kidneys into a state of ischemia, low blood flow, and concentrates toxins in the remaining tubular fluid. However, alcohol-induced dehydration is particularly aggressive because it is coupled with the introduction of a toxin, acetaldehyde, a metabolic byproduct of alcohol, that the kidneys must simultaneously work to clear. The organ is being asked to work overtime while being starved of the fluid medium it needs to function. This diuretic purge does not just strip the body of water, it depletes critical electrolytes. Heavy drinking causes the rapid excretion of potassium, magnesium, and phosphate. These ions are the electrical currency of the body, essential for muscle contraction, nerve transmission, and heart rhythm. The kidneys are the master regulators of these levels. When alcohol disrupts this balance, it creates a state of metabolic chaos.
Low magnesium, hypomagnesemia, and low phosphate, hypophosphatemia, can lead to muscle weakness and, critically, rhabdomyolysis. Rhabdomyolysis is a severe condition often seen in binge drinkers who pass out in awkward positions for hours or suffer muscle injury from falls. The muscle tissue breaks down, releasing myoglobin, a protein that is toxic to the kidneys, into the bloodstream. The myoglobin clogs the renal tubules like sludge, causing acute kidney injury, AKI, or acute tubular necrosis. This is a medical emergency that can lead to permanent kidney failure in the matter of days. Beyond the acute effects, chronic heavy drinking is a primary driver of hypertension, the silent killer of kidneys. Alcohol raises blood pressure through multiple mechanisms. It increases sympathetic nervous system activity, it alters the sensitivity of baroreceptors, pressure sensors, and it increases the levels of cortisol and calcium within the smooth muscle of the blood vessels, causing them to constrict. For the heavy drinker, blood pressure does not just spike, it remains chronically elevated. This high pressure, as detailed in previous entries, hammers the delicate glomerular capillaries, causing nephrosclerosis, hardening of the kidney vessels. Many patients who believe their kidneys are failing due to bad genes or age are actually suffering from alcohol-induced hypertension that has gone unmanaged for decades. However, the most terrifying consequence of heavy alcohol use is the connection between the liver and the kidneys, known as hepatorenal syndrome, HRS. The liver and kidneys are inextricably linked partners in waste management. The liver breaks down toxins, and the kidneys excrete them. When chronic alcohol abuse destroys the liver, cirrhosis, the blood flow through the liver is obstructed, portal hypertension. To compensate, the body releases vasodilators to the splanchnic circulation, the gut, which paradoxically causes severe vasoconstriction in the renal arteries. The kidneys, which may be structurally normal, simply stop receiving blood. They shut down in response to the liver's failure. This is a functional renal failure that is often terminal. Once a patient develops hepatorenal syndrome, the prognosis is grim without a dual liver-kidney transplant. It is the ultimate systemic collapse, proving that you cannot destroy one filter without dooning the other. We must also address the direct toxicity of alcohol on the renal parenchyma.
While the liver bears the brunt of oxidative metabolism, the kidneys also possess enzymes, CYP2E1, that metabolize ethanol. This local metabolism generates reactive oxygen species, ROS, free radicals that cause oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation in the kidney tissue. This leads to inflammation and cell death within the renal tubules. Recent studies have shown that chronic alcohol exposure causes the kidneys to swell and enlarge initially, followed by fibrosis and atrophy. The cellular architecture is literally dissolved by the solvent properties of ethanol and its toxic metabolites. The cultural context of binge drinking adds another layer of risk. The modern phenomenon of consuming massive amounts of alcohol in short windows, the weekend warrior model, is particularly shocking to the kidneys. The organ prefers stability, it thrives on homeostasis. A sudden influx of 10 or 15 standard drinks creates a hyperosmolar state, a shock to the system that can precipitate acute failure even in young, healthy individuals. This is often termed holiday heart syndrome when it affects cardiac rhythm, but holiday kidney is an equally valid concept. The sudden load of toxins combined with the dehydration of the hangover creates a period of extreme vulnerability for the renal system. Furthermore, the type of alcohol matters, specifically regarding purines. Beer and certain spirits are high in purines, chemical compounds that break down into uric acid. As noted in the sugar section, high uric acid leads to gout and kidney stones. The gouty kidney is a historical ailment of the aristocracy that has become democratized. Chronic alcohol consumption creates a perfect storm for uric acid stones. Dehydration concentrates the urine, while the alcohol itself increases uric acid production and decreases its excretion. The result is the precipitation of sharp, painful crystals that block the urinary tract and damage the kidney tissue. Furthermore, the dangerous interplay between alcohol and medications. Heavy drinkers often take NSAIDs, aspirin or ibuprofen, to manage hangovers. As we have explored, NSAIDs constrict blood flow to the kidneys. Taking an NSAID while dehydrated from a night of heavy drinking is essentially putting the kidneys in a vice grip. The alcohol has already reduced fluid volume. The NSAID then clamps the arteries shut. This combination is a common cause of hospital admissions for acute kidney failure in young adults.
The habit of heavy drinking represents a voluntary poisoning of the self. We often use alcohol to numb the mind, forgetting that we are simultaneously poisoning the body. The kidneys do not have the luxury of numbness. They must process every molecule of ethanol, every metabolite, and every shift in pH. They work tirelessly to maintain equilibrium in a system that the owner is actively trying to destabilize. The resilience of the kidney is remarkable, but it is finite. The transition from functioning alcoholic to renal failure patient can be sudden and catastrophic. In the future landscape of public health, the rising rates of alcohol-associated liver disease in younger demographics, 20s and 30s, predict a coming wave of secondary kidney failure. The normalization of high-functioning alcoholism, particularly in high-stress professions, masks the physiological toll being paid. To protect the kidneys, one must recognize that alcohol is a toxin that requires substantial biological resources to neutralize. Moderation is the key, but for the kidneys, the best alcohol is water. The social lubricant comes with a biological friction that wears down the gears of life, eventually grinding the filtration machinery to a halt. Recognizing the interconnectedness of hydration, blood pressure, and liver health is essential to understanding why alcohol is a formidable enemy of the renal system.
7. Smoking, the vascular asphyxiation of the filtration system. When the average person visualizes the biological devastation wrought by cigarette smoking, the imagery is almost exclusively pulmonary, blackened lungs, gasping breaths, and the slow suffocation of emphysema. This cultural fixation on the respiratory system, while entirely warranted, obscures a medical reality that is equally catastrophic. Smoking is a vascular poison that systematically strangles the kidneys. To understand why, one must remember that the kidney is not merely a filter, it is a vascular organ, a dense, complex ball of blood vessels. In fact, the kidney is the most vascularized organ in the human body relative to its weight. It is a biological machine built entirely of arteries, capillaries, and veins. Therefore, any habit that attacks the blood vessels is by definition a direct attack on the kidney.
Smoking, or the inhalation of combusted tobacco and its thousands of chemical byproducts, effectively turns the bloodstream into a corrosive sludge that scours the interior lining of the renal arteries, inducing a state of chronic ischemia and toxic accumulation that rivals the damage done to the lungs. However, the damage goes far deeper than temporary constriction. The cocktail of toxins in cigarette smoke, including carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, arsenic, and hydrogen cyanide, wages a war on the endothelium,
the delicate single layer of cells that lines the interior of the blood vessels. The endothelium is not just a wallpaper, it is a dynamic organ that regulates clotting, inflammation, and vessel tone. Smoking chemically incinerates this layer. Carbon monoxide, with its high affinity for hemoglobin, displaces oxygen in the blood. This creates a state of systemic hypoxia. The renal medulla, the inner part of the kidney, naturally operates in a low oxygen environment even in healthy individuals. When you add the hypoxic burden of carbon monoxide constriction of nicotine, the renal medulla is pushed into a critical zone of oxygen starvation. The cells begin to die, leading to tubular atrophy and interstitial fibrosis, the replacement of functioning kidney tissue with useless scar tissue. A specific and terrifying aspect of smoking-induced renal damage involves heavy metal toxicity, specifically cadmium. The tobacco plant is a hyperaccumulator of cadmium from the soil. When smoked, this heavy metal is vaporized and inhaled, passing directly into the bloodstream. The kidneys are the body's primary storage site for cadmium. Unlike organic toxins, which can be metabolized and excreted, cadmium binds to metallothionein proteins and accumulates in the cells of the proximal tubules. The biological half-life of cadmium in the kidney is estimated to be between 10 and 30 years. This means that every cigarette smoked in one's 20s deposits a microscopic amount of heavy metal that will remain, poisoning the cellular machinery well into one's 50s and 60s. This accumulation leads to a specific type of tubular dysfunction, where the kidney loses its ability to reabsorb proteins and vital nutrients, a condition often indistinguishable from heavy metal poisoning seen in industrial accidents. The interaction between smoking and other risk factors creates a synergy of destruction, often referred to as the multiplicative effect. For individuals with diabetes or hypertension, smoking is not just an additive risk, it is an accelerant. It speeds up the progression of diabetic nephropathy by orders of magnitude. In the context of diabetes, the high sugar levels are already damaging the basement membrane of the glomerulus. Smoking adds hemodynamic stress and oxidative stress to this mix. It is akin to pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire.
The risk of developing end-stage renal disease and requiring dialysis is exponentially higher in diabetic smokers than in non-smokers. Furthermore, smoking interferes with the medications used to protect the kidneys, such as ACE inhibitors, rendering the standard of care less effective. The smoker is essentially fighting a war against their own treatment plan. We must also confront the specter of renal cell carcinoma, RCC, the most common type of kidney cancer. The kidneys are responsible for filtering carcinogens from the blood and concentrating them in the urine. This means the urinary tract is exposed to higher concentrations of tobacco-specific nitrosamines than almost any other tissue in the body. The correlation is stark. Smoking doubles the risk of developing kidney cancer. This cancer is particularly insidious because the kidney is located deep in the retroperitoneum. Tumors can grow to massive sizes before they cause symptoms like flank pain or blood in the urine. By the time they are discovered, they have often metastasized. The tragedy of RCC in smokers is that it is a direct consequence of the organ doing its job, concentrating toxins to protect the rest of the body, only to be destroyed by the very toxins it collected. The rise of vaping and electronic cigarettes presents a new murky frontier in this investigation. While marketing often portrays vaping as a safe alternative involving only water vapor and nicotine, the renal implications are grim. Nicotine, regardless of the delivery method, remains a vasoconstrictor. It still clamps down on the renal arteries. Furthermore, the heating coils in vaping devices have been shown to leak heavy metals like lead, chromium, nickel, and manganese into the aerosol. The long-term effects of inhaling these aerosolized metals on the delicate filtration barriers of the kidney are not yet fully understood, but early toxicological data suggests we may be trading the tar of combustible cigarettes for the metallic toxicity of the digital age. The mechanism of injury changes, but the target remains the same. Culturally, the decline in smoking rates has been a public health victory, yet the lingering effects on the baby boomer generation are now manifesting in dialysis clinics. We are currently witnessing a wave of renal failure in elderly patients who quit smoking decades ago, a testament to the long-term latency of vascular damage and cadmium retention.
The scarring of the arterioles, arteriolosclerosis, caused by smoking is irreversible. Once the vessel walls have thickened and the lumen has narrowed, no amount of clean living can fully restore the flow. This latency period is the silent killer aspect of renal pathology. The decision to smoke is often made in adolescence, driven by social factors and marketing, but the bill comes due in the geriatric ward, paid in the currency of creatinine clearance and dialysis sessions. Philosophically, smoking represents the ultimate triumph of immediate gratification over long-term biological integrity. It is a voluntary hypoxia, a deliberate act of depriving one's own cells of the oxygen required for life. The kidney, an organ defined by its exquisite sensitivity to blood flow and pressure, simply cannot withstand this assault indefinitely. It possesses a renal reserve, a backup capacity that masks the early stages of damage, but smoking erodes this reserve day by day. When the reserve is gone, the crash is precipitous. To protect the kidneys, cessation is the only option. There is no safe level of smoking for the renal vasculature. Every puff is a tourniquet applied to the very organ that keeps the blood clean, a slow-motion suicide of the body's filtration system.
In the grand timeline of human evolution, the chair is a relatively recent invention, and arguably a lethal one. For millions of years, the human animal was an endurance machine designed to walk, run, climb, and labor for survival. Our physiology is predicated on movement. Our lymphatic system relies on muscle contractions to pump fluid. Our metabolism relies on activity to regulate insulin, and our blood pressure relies on the dynamic interplay of motion to maintain vascular tone. However, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, we have transitioned to a sedentary existence. We sit in cars, we sit at desks, and we sit on couches. This radical shift to a life of stillness has birthed a condition known as sedentary death syndrome, and the kidneys are among its primary victims. A sedentary lifestyle is not merely the absence of exercise, it is an active state of metabolic derangement that fundamentally alters the physics of the renal environment. The connection between sitting and kidney damage is mediated largely through the mechanism of obesity-related glomerulopathy, ORG, though it affects even those who are not clinically obese. When the body is stationary for prolonged periods, the large skeletal muscles, like the gluteals and quadriceps, become dormant. They stop consuming glucose from the bloodstream. This leads to a state of systemic insulin resistance. The pancreas pumps out more insulin to force the glucose into the resistant cells, leading to hyperinsulinemia. High levels of circulating insulin are toxic to the kidneys. They stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, increasing blood pressure, and they promote the retention of sodium. This creates a high-pressure, sodium-rich environment that, as we've explored in previous entries, shreds the delicate capillaries of the glomeruli. However, ORG is a specific and fascinating pathology. In a sedentary, overweight body, the metabolic demand is paradoxically high. The body has more mass to support, more tissue to perfuse, and more waste to clear. The kidneys, in an attempt to meet this demand, undergo hypertrophy. They physically grow larger. The individual glomeruli expand to increase their filtration surface area. This sounds like an adaptation, but it is a trap. The number of nephrons filtering units is fixed at birth. You cannot grow new ones. So the existing nephrons must hyperfilter,
working at 150% or 200% of their capacity to clear the blood of a larger sedentary body. This state, known as single nephron hyperfiltration, creates immense mechanical shear stress on the podocytes, the specialized cells that wrap around the capillaries. Eventually, the podocytes detach and die. The filter collapses. This leads to focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS, a scarring process that is a leading cause of kidney failure. The sedentary body is literally working its kidneys to death while sitting still. Beyond the mechanics of filtration, we must consider the role of visceral fat, which accumulates rapidly in sedentary individuals. We used to think of fat as inert energy storage, like a biological battery. We now know that visceral adipose tissue, the fat surrounding the organs, is an active endocrine organ. It is a gland that secretes inflammatory cytokines, such as interleukin-6, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha. These chemicals induce a state of chronic low-grade systemic inflammation. The kidney is extremely sensitive to this inflammation. The cytokines attack the endothelial lining of the renal blood vessels, promoting atherosclerosis and fibrosis. Essentially, the belly fat of a sedentary person is constantly dripping chemical poison onto the kidneys, inflaming the tissue and accelerating the aging process of the organ. There is also a purely hydraulic component to the damage caused by sitting. The human circulatory system relies on the muscle pump of the legs to return venous blood to the heart. When we sit for 8, 10, or 12 hours a day, blood pools in the lower extremities and the pelvic basin. This venous congestion increases the back pressure on the renal veins. The kidneys rely on a pressure gradient, high pressure coming in, arteries, and low pressure going out, veins, to filter blood effectively. When the venous pressure rises due to stagnation and compression of the torso, the gradient is reduced. The kidney becomes congested, a condition known as renal venous hypertension. This congestion reduces the oxygen delivery to the kidney tissue and promotes fibrosis. We are literally crushing our kidneys with the weight of our own inactivity. The psychological and sociological dimensions of the sedentary lifestyle are profound. We have engineered movement out of our lives. We use elevators instead of stairs, cars instead of walking, and email instead of walking to a colleague's desk.
This convenience is a biological catastrophe. The rise of the gaming culture and the streaming culture has created a demographic of young people who remain seated for 12 to 16 hours a day. Epidemiologists are already seeing the consequences, the emergence of hypertension and early-stage kidney disease in teenagers and young adults. This is a historical anomaly. Previous generations may have worn out their bodies through hard labor, but they rarely suffered from the stagnation-induced metabolic rot that defines the modern era. Furthermore, the concept of the weekend warrior is a dangerous fallacy in this context. Many people believe that sitting for 50 hours a week can be undone by going to the gym for an hour 3 times a week. The science suggests otherwise. The metabolic damage of prolonged sitting, the shutdown of lipoprotein lipase, an enzyme that breaks down fat, the spike in blood sugar, the venous congestion, happens in real time. Exercise is crucial, but it does not fully negate the damage of 12 hours of immobility. The kidney needs consistent low-level movement to maintain optimal hemodynamics. The active couch potato phenomenon describes individuals who exercise but still have high biomarkers for kidney stress because their non-exercise time is entirely sedentary. The future of this issue is tied to the concept of exercise mimetics, drugs that attempt to mimic the metabolic effects of exercise. While pharmaceutical companies are racing to develop pills that can improve insulin sensitivity and burn fat, they cannot replicate the hemodynamic benefits of movement. No pill can replicate the mechanical shear stress that keeps blood vessels flexible or the muscle pump that decongests the veins. We are looking for a chemical solution to a mechanical problem. The rise of dialysis centers in every strip mall in America is a testament to this failure. These centers are filled not just with the elderly, but with middle-aged individuals whose kidneys have succumbed to the triad of stagnation, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension, all rooted in a sedentary existence. The philosophical implication here is one of disconnection from our nature. We are animals designed for the plains, for the hunt, for the gathering. Our kidneys evolved to filter the blood of a creature in motion. By confining ourselves to chairs, cubicles, and car seats, we are placing our organs in an alien environment.
The stagnation of the body leads to the stagnation of the fluids within it. The ancient Greeks believed that stasis is death, and modern nephrology confirms this. The flow of life requires the flow of the body. To combat this, we must redefine activity. It is not just about working out, it is about living in motion. Standing desks, walking meetings, taking the stairs, and breaking up periods of sitting with movement are not just lifestyle hacks, they are renal preservation strategies. We must recognize that the chair is a tool that must be used sparingly. The human body is a use it or lose it system. When we stop moving, the body receives the signal that it is time to shut down. The kidneys, ever the obedient servants, follow suit. They harden, they scar, and they fail, victims of a lifestyle that prioritized comfort over the kinetic requirements of life itself. The fight against kidney disease is at its core a fight against inertia.
9. Ignoring blood pressure and diabetes, the twin assassins of the renal architecture. If the human kidney is a fortress designed to withstand the siege of daily metabolism, then high blood pressure and diabetes are the traitors within the walls, slowly dismantling the defenses brick by microscopic brick. In the grim hierarchy of renal pathology, these two conditions, often occurring in tandem, stand unrivaled as the primary architects of end-stage renal disease, ESRD. They are responsible for nearly 3/4 of all kidney failure cases worldwide. Yet the habit discussed here is not merely having these conditions, which is often genetic or systemic. The habit is the profound, pervasive culture of negligence, denial, and mismanagement that surrounds them. We live in an era where biometric data is available at our fingertips, yet millions of individuals actively choose to ignore the creeping elevation of their systolic pressure or the gradual climb of their fasting glucose. This psychological phenomenon of benign neglect is in reality a form of slow-motion biological suicide. To ignore these numbers is to grant permission for a silent, relentless assault on the most delicate vasculature in the human body. To comprehend the sheer violence of uncontrolled hypertension, high blood pressure, on the kidney, one must first appreciate the organ's hemodynamic nature. The kidney is essentially a pressurized filtration unit. It requires a specific pressure gradient to force plasma through the glomerular filter. However, this system is designed for nuance, not brute force. When systemic blood pressure rises and remains elevated, a condition often devoid of symptoms, the force of the blood hammering against the walls of the renal arteries and arterioles becomes destructive. Imagine a garden hose designed for gentle watering suddenly connected to a fire hydrant. The structural integrity cannot hold. The delicate endothelial cells lining the arteries are sheared and damaged. In response to this constant trauma, the vessel walls undergo a process called arteriosclerosis. They thicken, harden, and narrow in a desperate attempt to reinforce themselves. This hardening turns the supple, flexible vessels of the kidney into rigid, narrow pipes. This vascular stiffening leads to a catastrophic paradox. While the systemic blood pressure is high, the blood flow reaching the actual nephrons, the filtering units, drops because the vessels are so narrow.
The kidney perceives this lack of flow as a signal of low blood pressure. In a tragic biological miscalculation, it activates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAS, releasing hormones that constrict the blood vessels further and retain more salt and water to raise pressure. The kidney, trying to save itself, inadvertently pours gasoline on the fire, driving systemic blood pressure even higher. This vicious feedback loop accelerates the destruction. The glomeruli, starved of oxygen and battered by pressure, become sclerotic, scarred, and non-functional. This condition, hypertensive nephrosclerosis, transforms the living, vibrant tissue of the kidney into a shrunken, granular, leather-like husk. The tragedy is that this process is entirely silent. A person can walk around with a blood pressure of 160/100 for a decade feeling fine, while their kidneys are slowly turning to stone. By the time swelling or fatigue sets in, the damage is often irreversible. Parallel to this hemodynamic assault is the chemical warfare of diabetes mellitus. If hypertension is the hammer, diabetes is the acid. Uncontrolled blood sugar, hyperglycemia, creates a toxic environment that fundamentally alters the biochemistry of the renal filter. When glucose levels are chronically high, sugar molecules begin to bond indiscriminately with proteins in the blood and the kidney tissue itself, a process known as non-enzymatic glycation. These sugar-coated proteins, known as advanced glycation end products, AGEs, are sticky, rigid, and inflammatory. They accumulate in the basement membrane of the glomerulus, the ultrafine mesh that separates clean blood from waste. As the membrane becomes saturated with these sticky sugars, it thickens and loses its selective permeability. It becomes leaky. Albumin, a vital protein that should remain in the blood, begins to seep into the urine. This condition, proteinuria, is the canary in the coal mine for diabetic nephropathy. But the damage of diabetes is not just structural, it is dynamic. In the early stages of uncontrolled diabetes, the kidneys actually grow larger and filter more blood than normal, a state called hyperfiltration. The high sugar load in the filtrate forces the kidney to work overtime to reabsorb glucose and sodium. To accommodate this workload, the afferent arteriole, the inlet vessel, dilates, allowing a massive surge of blood into the glomerulus. The internal pressure of the filter skyrockets.
The delicate podocytes, cells that wrap around the capillaries like tentacles to support the structure, are stretched to their breaking point. Eventually, they detach and die. Podocytes do not regenerate. Once they are gone, the filter collapses. The space they leave behind is filled with scar tissue, forming distinct lesions known as Kimmel-Steele-Wilson nodules. These nodules are the tombstones of the nephron. As they grow, they obliterate the capillary loops, and the kidney's ability to filter waste vanishes. The synergy between these two conditions, hypertension and diabetes, is what makes the habit of ignoring them so lethal. They are force multipliers. Diabetes damages the blood vessels, making them stiff and prone to high pressure. Hypertension drives the pressure into the diabetic kidney, accelerating the mechanical destruction of the sugar-weakened filters. It is a double-hit phenomenon. Patients who manage one but ignore the other are still playing a dangerous game, but those who neglect both are on an express train to dialysis. The clinical term for this is the cardiorenal metabolic syndrome, a recognition that the heart, metabolism, and kidneys are inextricably linked. Ignoring the check engine light on one inevitably leads to the failure of the others. The habit of ignoring these conditions is deeply rooted in human psychology and the nature of modern medicine. Hypertension and early diabetes are asymptomatic. There is no pain, no bleeding, no lump to feel. It requires a proactive mindset to treat a condition that feels like nothing. Many individuals fall into the trap of subjective health assessment, believing that because they feel energetic and strong, their physiology is sound. They skip annual physicals, they ignore the borderline numbers on a screening test, rationalizing them as stress or a bad day. When prescribed medication, ACE inhibitors for pressure or metformin for sugar, adherence is notoriously poor. The side effects are immediate and tangible, while the benefit, preventing kidney failure in 20 years, is abstract and distant. This temporal disconnect leads to a culture of non-compliance. People stop taking their pills because they feel fine, unaware that the microscopic siege on their glomeruli has resumed the moment the chemical blockade is lifted. Culturally, we must also address the normalization of the metabolic syndrome phenotype. As waistlines have expanded and sedentary lifestyles have become the norm,
The prevalence of type 2 diabetes and hypertension has skyrocketed. In some demographics, these conditions are so common they are viewed as inevitable consequences of aging rather than treatable pathologies. This fatalism contributes to the habit of negligence. Everyone in my family has sugar, a patient might say, accepting the diagnosis as a heritage rather than a warning. This normalization masks the severity of the threat. We treat these diseases as lifestyle issues rather than the organ-destroying plagues they are. The medical system, overwhelmed by the volume of chronic disease, often rushes through the explanation, handing out prescriptions without conveying the visceral reality of what is happening inside the renal cortex. The cost of this negligence is staggering. Dialysis clinics are proliferating in strip malls across the developed world, a grim testament to our failure to manage these twin killers. Dialysis is a miraculous technology, but it is a grueling, life-altering half measure. It replaces the elegant, continuous 24/7 filtration of the kidney with a thrice-weekly mechanical purge that leaves patients exhausted and immunocompromised.
The vast majority of people sitting in those chairs are not there because of rare genetic diseases or exotic toxins. They are there because of years of uncontrolled blood pressure and diabetes. They are the victims of the silent years, the decades where the damage accumulated unnoticed and unchecked. Ultimately, the habit of ignoring blood pressure and diabetes is a failure of visualization. We cannot see our kidneys. We cannot feel the nephrons dying. We cannot sense the glomerular basement membrane thickening. We are blind to the internal landscape of our own bodies. Breaking this habit requires a shift in consciousness, a realization that the numbers on a blood pressure cuff or a glucose meter are not just data points. They are the structural stress tests of our biological foundation. To ignore them is to build a life on a crumbling physiological infrastructure. The kidney is a resilient organ, capable of functioning with only a fraction of its capacity, but it has a breaking point. Once that point is reached and the fibrosis sets in, there is no turning back. The cure for kidney failure does not exist. Only prevention remains, and prevention begins with the acknowledgement that the silent killers are screaming, if only we would listen to the numbers.
10. Taking unverified supplements or herbal products, the lottery of toxicity. In the final entry of this investigation, we turn our lens to a habit born not of negligence, but of a misplaced desire for health optimization. In a world increasingly skeptical of pharmaceutical intervention, millions have turned to the unregulated frontier of dietary supplements, herbal remedies, and natural performance enhancers. Driven by the naturalistic fallacy, the belief that because something comes from the earth it is inherently safe, consumers are ingesting complex pharmacological agents without understanding the potential for renal devastation. This habit is akin to playing Russian roulette with one's biochemistry. The kidney, as the body's primary filtration system, is the first organ to encounter and concentrate these ingested substances. When those substances are nephrotoxic, the kidney becomes the primary casualty. The tragedy of this habit is that it is often the health-conscious individual, the fitness enthusiast, the holistic healer, the proactive patient, who unknowingly destroys their own organs in a bid to improve them. To understand the scope of this danger, we must look at the regulatory landscape, or rather, the lack thereof. In many countries, including the United States under the DSHA Act of 1994, supplements are not subject to the rigorous safety and efficacy testing required of pharmaceuticals. They are treated more like food than drugs. This means a product can hit the shelves without ever proving it is safe for the kidneys. The burden of proof lies on the FDA to prove harm after it has occurred. This post-market surveillance model leaves the consumer as the guinea pig. The shelves of health food stores are lined with products containing concentrated plant extracts, heavy metals, and unlisted adulterants that can trigger acute kidney injury, chronic interstitial nephritis, and even cancer. The most chilling example of this is the story of aristolochic acid. Found in the Aristolochia genus of plants, often used in traditional Chinese medicine for weight loss, pain, and asthma, this compound is one of the most potent renal toxins known to science. In the 1990s, a slimming clinic in Belgium prescribed a herbal regimen to over 100 women. Within a year, dozens of these young, healthy women developed rapidly progressive kidney failure.
The cause was traced to a botanical error. An innocent herb, Stephania tetrandra, had been swapped for the toxic Aristolochia fongshi. The toxin caused massive interstitial fibrosis, scarring of the tissue between the tubules. But the horror didn't stop at kidney failure. Aristolochic acid is also a powerful carcinogen. Many of these women later developed urothelial carcinoma, cancer of the urinary tract. This phenomenon, now known as aristolochic acid nephropathy, AAN, solved the decades-old mystery of Balkan endemic nephropathy, where villagers in the Balkans were dying of kidney failure after consuming flour contaminated with Aristolochia seeds. Despite global warnings, Aristolochia can still be found in unregulated herbal products purchased online, a silent killer lurking in the natural aisle. Beyond specific botanical toxins, there is the pervasive issue of heavy metal contamination. Ayurvedic medicines, traditional remedies from South Asia, often intentionally include calcined metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic, believed to have therapeutic properties, a practice known as Ras Ashastar. Modern analysis, however, reveals that these metals are directly nephrotoxic. Lead, for instance, accumulates in the proximal tubules, causing mitochondrial damage and cellular death. Chronic lead exposure leads to saturnine gout and progressive renal insufficiency. Mercury induces an autoimmune reaction in the kidneys, leading to membranous nephropathy and massive protein leakage. Consumers taking these ancient remedies for arthritis or vitality are often unaware they are ingesting toxic loads of heavy metals that will reside in their kidney tissue for decades, slowly poisoning the filtration machinery. The modern fitness industry is another major vector for this habit. The stack, the combination of pre-workout powders, creatine, protein supplements, and fat burners, places an immense chemical burden on the kidneys. While creatine is generally safe for healthy individuals, it can be dangerous for those with pre-existing undiagnosed kidney issues. The real danger, however, lies in the proprietary blends of pre-workout stimulants. These products often contain massive doses of caffeine, combined with obscure stimulants like DMAA or synephrine. These compounds are potent vasoconstrictors. Just like nicotine or cocaine, they clamp down on the renal arteries.
reducing blood flow to the kidneys during intense exercise, precisely when the kidneys need blood the most to clear metabolic waste. This can precipitate rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdown, where the kidneys are clogged with myoglobin. The combination of dehydration, heat stress, vasoconstrictive supplements, and muscle breakdown creates a perfect storm for acute kidney injury in young, fit individuals. Furthermore, the more is better mentality regarding vitamins contributes to renal pathology. Vitamin C, universally hailed as an immune booster, is metabolized into oxalate. Megadose vitamin C, taking grams per day, creates a surge of oxalate in the urine. If the individual is dehydrated, this oxalate binds with calcium to form calcium oxalate kidney stones. These stones can cause obstruction and physical damage to the kidney tissue. Similarly, excessive vitamin D intake can lead to hypercalcemia, high blood calcium, which causes calcium deposits to form within the kidney tissue itself, a condition called nephrocalcinosis. The kidney literally calcifies, turning from soft tissue into hard, non-functional grit. This is a classic case of the dose makes the poison, where a vital nutrient becomes a toxin through the habit of unregulated supplementation. The adulteration of supplements with hidden pharmaceuticals is perhaps the most insidious threat. To make their products effective, unscrupulous manufacturers often spike herbal supplements with actual drugs. Natural pain relief pills have been found to contain prescription NSAIDs. Male enhancement herbs often contain sildenafil, Viagra analogs. Weight loss teas may contain diuretics or sibutramine, a banned appetite suppressant. A consumer taking these products is unknowingly ingesting drugs that have known renal side effects, often in uncontrolled dosages and in dangerous combinations. The kidney, which must metabolize and excrete these mystery chemicals, bears the brunt of this pharmaceutical fraud. Psychologically, this habit is driven by a distrust of big pharma and a romanticism of ancient wisdom. There is a comforting narrative that nature is benevolent and that traditional remedies are superior to synthetic ones. This narrative ignores the fact that nature is filled with poisons. Arsenic, hemlock, and belladonna are all 100% natural. The kidney does not care about the origin of a molecule. It only cares about its chemical structure and toxicity.
The complexity of herbal pharmacopoeia means that a single plant extract can contain hundreds of active compounds, many of which may interact with prescription medications or accumulate in the renal tissue. Without standardization, every bottle is a different chemical experiment. The cultural impact of the supplement industry is massive, a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut that operates largely on testimonials and marketing rather than clinical data. Influencers and wellness gurus promote detox teas and kidney cleanse supplements, which ironically often stress the kidneys further. The concept of a kidney cleanse is physiologically redundant. The kidney is the cleanser. It does not need to be scrubbed. It needs to be protected from toxins. Adding more concentrated chemicals to the system in the name of detoxing is a contradiction that often leads to pathology. In the future, as global supply chains become more opaque and the demand for biohacking grows, the incidence of supplement-induced nephrotoxicity is likely to rise. We are already seeing nephrotoxicity of unknown origin cases in clinics, where the only common denominator is a cabinet full of unverified supplements. To protect the kidneys, one must adopt a posture of defensive ingestion. Every pill, powder, or tincture that enters the mouth must be vetted. Is it third-party tested? Is the ingredient list transparent? Is there clinical evidence of safety? The kidney is an unforgiving filter. It retains what it cannot excrete. Filling it with heavy metals, aristologic acid, or unknown stimulants is a habit that trades the hope of health for the reality of disease. The most effective supplement for the kidney remains the one that is free, abundant, and pure: water. Everything else is a calculated risk.